Hello and welcome to the RSS Built Environment Forum webinar series. Today's session is in partnership with HKA. Danielle, can I have the next slide, please? I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may, to thank A-Site, our lead technical partner, just to begin with. My name is Martin Burns. I'm Head of ADR Research and Development at RSCS. Today's session is going to be, subject matter is operating in uncertain times and how can the construction industry adapt to a new normal. Over the next hour, I and four leading experts in the field will be discussing this subject matter, operating in uncertain times, and how the construction industry can adapt to the new normal. First of all, I'd like to use this opportunity to give you a little oversight to HKA's Crooks report. If we could just move through the next slide, Danielle. This report draws on HKA's unprecedented knowledge to provide valuable insights into the most common causes of claims and disputes in the construction and engineering sector. And it's, as you can see from some of the slides I'm going to whip through here, some of the headline facts and figures show the astounding scale of cash and time lost on construction and engineering projects around the globe. And I think the preamble to this session is that these statistics are eye-watering, and in fact it's extraordinary that this year's Crooks report has shown how in 1,400 projects across 94 countries that there have been an immense amount of overruns and capital values of 3/4 of scheduled programs being wasted. I'm not going to go through these slides in any great detail, and if you download the webinar after this is completed, you'll see there's some nice comprehensive notes which cover these slides in more detail than I'm able to give in the short time we've got available here. But what I'd like you to do is to download the webinar after this, have a look at the notes, but of course, for much more detail, you really should download the HKA Crooks report itself and see the immense amount of granular detail that that also provides. As I say, just whip through these slides. This report has identified sort of the key areas where disputes arise, and this is not just endemic to one particular region. This is happening globally, and of course COVID-19 is a global pandemic, but the issues around shortages of materials, inconsistent adoption of technology, and a failure by some businesses to adapt quickly to technology, political drivers to get construction projects finished quicker than normal, sustainability and climate concern. Of course, we've just had the COP26 conference. All of these issues, of course, are underpinning the problems that are arising in the construction engineering sector and driving different forces to create disputes and conflicts. Danielle? You know, we're living in uncertain times. Everybody knows that right across the globe. And COVID-19, for example, directly impacts on the industry, creating a shortage of movement of people, the shortages of skills, raw materials, there's, as I say, political drivers. Greater detail, of course, is available if you do download the report. What I'd like to do now is introduce you, if I may, to the panel of people who are going to be talking today. Helen Colley is a technical director at HKA. Laura Lintott is a senior associate at Trowers and Hamlin's legal firm. Justin Sullivan, who I've known for many years as chair of Construction Industry Council, and Charles Wilsoncroft is a partner at HKA. And it's Charles I want to talk to first because we have a number of questions which I think will help to create a discussion around how we adopt to the new world that's arising. And Charles, I'd like you, if you may, just to give us 30 seconds or a minute just to tell us who you are, and then perhaps you and I can have a discussion around the severity of COVID-19 and the impact it's had on the engineering sector.
Sure, thank you, Martin, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Charles Wilson-Croft. As Martin mentioned, I'm a partner at HKA. I've been with HKA in pre-COVID business for nearly 12, 13 years now. I'm a civil engineer by trade, and I am involved in, and generally get involved in, all aspects of the project life cycle for construction work. So from the advisory stage, pre-contracts and non-contentious work, through assisting with developing and assessing claims, and then providing expert witness support when and if things do go down the formal dispute resolution path. I do a lot of work both in the UK and also internationally. I have a significant international focus, so I have quite a reasonable feel of the wider impact of COVID in both regions and nationally. And I think the question about the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic is quite a crucial starting point. You know, I think it's fair to say that certainly pretty much every construction project that I've been involved in or been aware of over the last couple of years has been impacted by the effects of COVID, and I'd say most of them have been impacted to quite a significant degree. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that, you know, some parties have actually had some positive impacts from COVID. You know, some companies have been able to use the issues that are arising globally to reinforce their positions. But in respect of the delivery of projects, generally there has been negative impact across the board, and that has been due to a wide range of reasons. We all saw in the earlier stages that the supply chains were being impacted quite a lot of material and equipment coming out of China. Certainly in Europe in the early stages, a lot of equipment coming through and being manufactured in Italy was being severely impacted. Supply chains do seem to have bounced back from that somewhat. However, we are still seeing a hangover. There are still issues in respect of certain components. You know, we're all aware of the global microchip drought, as it were, which is then impacting the fabrication of equipment and plant and construction plant on site. So you know, companies like JCB and CAT are having big impacts, which is then slowing down the ability to get that equipment into the workforce on a worldwide scale. Obviously, from a delivery point of view on projects, movement of labour has been a key issue, and this is probably more prevalent in international projects where you have large labour forces who are moving from one country to another. You know, a migratory workforce who come in and do a significant bit of work. I do a lot of work in the offshore environment as well, and those projects have also been significantly hampered, with different countries, different regions around the world having different restrictions on vessel movements, restrictions on crew changes, and the inability to have that kind of consistent cycle that these contractors utilise. So there really has been a very, very broad impact. From a national level, different countries have had different varying degrees of internal restrictions in respect of working practices, in respect of requirement to isolate, in respect of people having to quarantine or being off with illness. So there really is myriad issues that have impacted COVID to really quite a significant degree. It's also worth mentioning there have been impacts in the design stage as well in some places. Now, you know, some projects, some companies have obviously moved to remote working, which has added a lot of flexibility and ability to bend and flex with issues as they arise. But again, some companies had significant issues where they had the majority of the workforce or very large numbers of workforce being off. So therefore, the early stage contract, the feed stages, the design development stages took quite a significant hit in those early stages of COVID as well.
Charles, can I just ask a quick question? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Please.
Well, one of the things that I was very keen to hear is very much about whether you think the impact of COVID in terms of its severity is a short, medium, or long-term thing.
Well, I think ultimately you had the initial short-term delay impact, which was very, very keenly felt and really unavoidable and very noticeable, that impacted projects straight away. So a very severe impact in respect of, you know, either a shutdown or a specific delay to a project, which ultimately will have an immediate run out. Then you run into the medium term, which is the kind of ongoing disruptive effects, which we're still seeing now. You know, so projects generally aren't shut now. However, as we all know, we're still in COVID, very much so, and she's coming around again for another bite, as it were, with the new variants. And you know, certainly in Western Europe, we're starting to see tighter restrictions, and globally, you know, some countries have still got very strict restrictions, and I think we're going to continue to see this ebb and flow. So this kind of current medium-term ongoing disruptive elements is going to end up being is going to end up having a long-term impact. That's not even interplaying with the very long-term impact, which is the general hangover of the sector to try and get back up to speed for all the ground that we've lost. So I think it really is a short kind of that media image issue in respect of, well, the site can't work now. Medium disruptive impacts, which is ongoing, which is going to end up in a long-term hangover, which, you know, is going to be a difficult, you know, similar to the 2007 financial crash. You know, it takes a long time for the industry to make back up that gap and fill that kind of that void that has arisen over the last 2 years now.
And everything you've said there kind of underpins the sort of theme of this webinar today, which is about uncertainty. And what does that tell us about the challenges for project managers now and going forward?
Well, project managers have to, you know, they've very much had to change the way they look at things. I mean, we were discussing just before we came on, weren't we, about this idea of kind of collaborative approach and what have you, but it's almost a bit more basic than that. You know, it used to be the way that you could enter into a project and you'd have you know, obviously we'd have a reasonable handle on the impacts, that, you know, the risks that would arise on that, and experienced project managers and project management companies and employers and contractors going into projects would have a reasonably good handle on, well, what are the risks that are going to apply to this? Well, it seems like COVID has almost kind of rewritten the rule book when it comes to understanding risk and the impact of risk, you know, because as we said, we're now getting a handle on what it has meant to be involved with COVID and what it means to be able to work with and deal with it. Going forwards, we still can't see a complete way out. We're still going to have to come up with ways to work around that. But I think there's actually some value and benefit of that. You know, there is obviously there's a lot of tragedy, there's a lot of human tragedy that's come out of this process. But I think we will look back in 10, 15, 20 years time and think, well, actually, there are a lot of positive movements that have been made, or developments that have been made in effective project management, to build into project delivery structures the ability to flex, to bend, to be able to look forward, a little bit more insight, spot issues as they arise, and have a workforce, have a resilient supply chain, and have contractors who are able to move, like I said, bend and flex with the, you know, the weft and the weave of things as they may arise. So it might be that COVID itself ceases to be an issue in the future, but then something else that may come along, well, we've got a more resilient project management structure, an industry set up around that to be able to move a little bit more with the moving times.
Everything you say there, Charles, resonates with me, and it resonates with a conference I attended just a couple of weeks ago, where you know, I heard it said that the world has changed, it's still changing, and it's never going to go back to the way it was. And some of that is a positive thing, which is effectively what you're saying. We might be scratching our heads now, and project managers might be scratching their heads, but going forward, there's some positivity that can be drawn from what's happening as a result of all of this. That seems to be key.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and this, I think, just the mindset of of having to be more adaptable. You know, it's the idea of adaptability. You know, so whereas we've realised for several years now that companies need to be adaptable. You know, if you're too rigid as a company, then you're going to risk being left behind. But I think we need to apply that kind of mentality to project delivery stage, because I think project delivery stage at the moment is still a little bit rigid. This is how we deliver it and this is what we do. Well, we need to get that mindset of being adaptable, being flexible, being able to be reactive, and apply that better to a project, because very often contracts aren't able to be easily reactive and flexible, because they set a box. You know, they set a parameter. You know, the contractors to do this in a certain amount of time in a certain way. Obviously, you can have more flexible contracting models, but there's a payoff with that in respect to where the risk sits, where the the flexibility of the employer, all the rest of it. You know, talk about this all day. But I think this idea of having more flexible models generally is probably going to result in a more resilient industry in the future.
Yeah, and everything that you say is being driven by the COVID. You know, there's all these changes, all this move to more flexibility and thinking about how projects should be delivered. So to that extent, then, is the impact of COVID-19 unique in your experience?
I think as it, on its own merits, yes, it is unique, and obviously there's been lots of people talking about this, and lots of people talking about the fact that it's unprecedented, and obviously people using force majeure clauses left, right, and centre, and all the rest of it. And I think genuinely it is different, certainly in living memory. You know, I'm 43 and I can't think of anything that is generally like it. Now, we have obviously had large global scale issues that have impacted the construction sector in the past. So as I mentioned before, the 2007 financial crash was a global issue. It did impact a lot of projects, but in a slightly different way. You know, that was more focused on because of national backing. You know, infrastructure projects weren't necessarily impacted so much. It was more private sector development, residential side of things. Those projects seemed to be hit a bit more, and it was hit in a different way. It was more a case that those kind of projects were either mothballed or scrapped or stopped, and there were lots of empty building sites around, as we all remember. And funders just said, well, actually, no, I'm going to just stop investing for the time being. Now, that's although that impacted globally, and it certainly impacted construction very, very significantly, it didn't permeate into everyone's lives. It didn't permeate into every aspect of everything that people did as much as COVID did. And it didn't have that kind of ongoing disruptive effect. It had more of a effect, and it was obviously very, very damaging, but it was more a case of, right, everything's stopping and then everything's going to restart again, slowly picked up, start again. Whereas this is more just an ongoing cultural impact. And as you mentioned, I think, this is the disruptive effects are going to continue with COVID for a significant period yet. And so that's the thing about it as well. It's a very difficult thing to actually put your finger on and define what it is, compared to the 2007 crash, which was much more distinct. It's much more kind of definable, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There have been things in recent memory and indeed distant memories which had significant impact on construction projects, but certainly in our living memory, and I'm slightly older than you, Charles, I'm not going to say how old, but in my memory as well, there hasn't been anything that's been as unique as COVID-19 in terms of its short, medium and long-term impact. And as far as the long-term impact goes, we're still not sure where it's going to go and how long it's going to last.
No.
I'd like to move on, and thank you very much, Charles. And please do contribute if you feel you'd like to other conversations we'll engage in now. I want to move on to, if I may, to Justin. Before I do, those who are listening, can you please take advantage of the facility to ask questions as well, and we'll try and pick those up. Any questions that we don't have time to deal with here that you may want to put to this panel, we will endeavour to follow up afterwards, so please do. Justin, before you introduce yourself, the subject matter of your particular question about frequency of disputes, I was talking to some government officials pretty early on in the lockdown, and their concern was that the COVID-19 and the new environment we're all living in was actually going to be the cause of a tsunami of disputes in the future. And it'd be interesting to get your kind of feel on, you know, compared to before the pandemic, where we are now and what we might be seeing in the future about the frequency and nature of disputes.
Sure. Thanks, Martin. It's good to see you, and welcome everybody. So I'm a quantum expert. I'm a quantity surveyor, a fellow of RICS and the Expert Witness Institute, and my practice is called ADARE, and I practice mainly in the UK. I have done overseas work, but it's mainly UK based. I've held roles at RICS. I've been on Governing Council. I was Global Chair for QS Construction for a number of years, and my current post for outward giving to construction is I chair the Construction Industry Council. So I also chaired a coalition called ICMS, which I will talk a little bit about as well. So Martin, you're an RICS guy, and I'm going to ask you a question. So when we go into recession, what happens to the amount of appointments of adjudicators and arbitrators?
Good question. Just historically, and I've been working for RICS, would believe, for over 30 years. So I've seen trends and I've seen recessionary impacts on dispute resolution. And what tends to happen is ahead of a kind of an impact on the economy is adjudication numbers will start to rise and rise very quickly. Yeah. We know that because RICS appoints adjudicators, and we probably appoint more adjudicators than other organisations. And we see, as we move into a recessionary situation, a peak of adjudication numbers, and then as the recession really hits, they drop off a cliff and start to really.
That's why I asked the question. I knew the answer to that question, and I've been asking Simon Rubinson at RICS when he does his graphs. He loves a graph, Simon, and he tracks what's happening with our economy. That he puts your stats on that graph, because it's a really good indication of where we are in that curve of a recession. And he hasn't done it yet, but now this is going to be recorded, so I'll play it back. So a tsunami of disputes for sure. Okay, so we're really busy. My dispute team is the busiest team in my business. Are they COVID-related disputes? No, they're not. They're not pandemic related. I think what happens is it's recession, that we went into. It was a shock. And what people do when they're sitting there in lockdown at home, they look at their balance sheet and they go after money. I think that's what they do. I think things have been rumbling along and they think, well, I'm approaching the limitation period, I'm going to go after it. So we've seen lots and lots and lots of disputes, lots and lots of claims. We're seeing much more litigation than adjudication now in arbitration. I think that litigation, because there's more certainty with it, you're not paying the dispute resolver. Often on the chunky stuff, it goes to adjudication and then it goes to litigation because one party, or maybe both, maybe there's more than one party, hey, I've got one where there's six, and they don't agree with it. But what I've seen, Martin, and with my other industry roles on, is I've seen of the ADARE's projects, because we have a project team as well, is that we've not had disputes there. We've probably got 100 jobs running at any one time. They all came to a solution during lockdown. Suspension on sites for some of them, they all came to a solution. There was one that hadn't settled, and I believe, and I hope it's just recently settled. And I think the reason they've done that is because the client was worried because the market changed, the market dropped, okay? The banks are then worried because construction costs are going to go up, even if it is force majeure, and even if the contractor is not entitled to any loss and expense, or the client can't deduct damages. The finances around the project have changed. Now that could lead to contractors' balance sheets being worrying, bonds being called on. So they settled. So refunded, refinanced, and reset the project. The other thing that we're seeing, and it wasn't on my radar, is we're seeing, particularly in the UK, and I imagine overseas, we're seeing a lot of claims on professional indemnity insurance. So that is where the contractor might have gone bust, and the only place the client can go, the funder can go, get money is from people who are insured, and inevitably that's the consultants. So they're claiming against people's insurance, That has led to huge hikes in insurance premiums, but it's also led to a problem where when you're in the dispute and you're in the mediation and you're trying to settle, the person you're claiming against, although they have insurance, they might not have cover. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of coverage issues where insurers aren't covering people or reducing cover. Now, the effect that has, it might be that someone carries 10 million insurance, for example, but they've got so many claims against them that it goes over their limit, in which case they're calling on balance sheets and outside of the insurance provision. So yes, we are seeing more disputes. We're seeing different types of disputes, yes, around the cladding and the fire safety issue, which is not just a UK problem, I know, because I know people in Ireland and Middle East are suffering from this as well, and because the market is changing. And so the drivers that clients have and contractors have is making life difficult. But the solution to it, Martin, and I do have that, is the Spice Girls, and that's a UK pop group. And they had great success when they were all together. It was one of the most successful female bands ever. But when they split up and did their solo careers, they were a disaster. And it just shows how collaboration can work. And I use the Spice Girls a lot as an example. And we're seeing that in our sector. So we're seeing the Construction Leadership Council as an example of that, the Construction Industry Council and the ICMS Coalition. We launched ICMS 3 yesterday. I have to get that plug in, which is it's all about data and data costing. And all of those three things are examples of how our sector, which is traditionally very fragmented, with collaboration is coming together and it's getting better. So I'd like to see, and Charles mentioned it, our forms of contract are very adversarial. They cause disputes. If you want to get into a court in the UK, you've got a 2-year wait, I think, to get into the TCC. And that's a product of having an adversarial forms of contract and legal system, which if we could work more flexibly in the future, maybe that will be better. So that a very long answer to not one of your questions, but does that help?
Yeah, Justin, I've never heard the Spice Girls analogy before, and I think I'm not going to forget it. So that means it's worked. Well done there. Look, you asked me a question a moment or two ago. You asked me a question about my experience of what happens as we enter into a recessionary period, and I said that adjudication numbers take a big hike and then they drop off the cliff. Well, let me tell you that when lockdown occurred in March 2020, adjudication numbers did take a big hike, 50% increase month on month.
Wow.
The thing is, they didn't fall off a cliff afterwards.
Right.
They dropped back down a little. They dropped back down to just above pre-COVID levels. But in the last 2-3 months, we've started to see it start to rise again. I tell you what we've also seen is more and more SMEs taking advantage of adjudication. You know, businesses that we'd never seen before, and SMEs that are using adjudication more than once. This is telling us a different story, one we haven't seen before. But it's also telling us that the construction industry remains rife with disputes. And I'd be interested in getting your view on why is the construction industry so prone to disputes?
I think, okay, I mean, one is the adversarial contracts, okay? I mean, the other is, I mean, I'm going to talk about the UK again, and I apologise because we've got people from all over the world on this call, that our tier 1 contractors work on margins of between 1% and 4%. That's what they work on. So they win the job, and the next thing they do is they hammer their supply chain to try and get the price down, to try and improve their margins. And then they open up their book and they're looking at the consultants that have been novated over and claiming from the client. And it just leads to disputes. That's a rather cynical view. I'm a quantum expert, so I see a lot of disputes. But it does trouble me that we have an industry that does that. I'd be interested in Charles. Would you share that view? Is it a product of a very low margin industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. You know, and this thing, going back to the question before, people are obviously focusing on COVID, but you know, you can't forget that we had significant issues, and we will continue to have significant issues likely pre and post the effects of COVID for exactly that reason. You know, just look at example of Carillion as a headline example, but that's not an isolated example, and it's all related to this story. So absolutely, yeah, 100% agree with you that there's issues with the whole supply chain structure in that respect, and the mentality that parties go into. So the question is, what is the solution, Justin?
It's collaboration. We need to be, you mentioned it, we need to be more flexible in our forms of contract, and our approach to client needs to be as well. Yeah, I'd like to think that as a sector, we're the biggest industry. You know, globally, we're 13% of GDP in construction, and we need to sort ourselves out, really.
You say collaboration, Justin. I think it is that. It's more than that, because collaboration needs a culture change. You know, to move away from historical, combative, adversarial nature. And before this session today, we had the luxury of having a conversation around the UK government's promotion of conflict avoidance and early intervention, and encouraging parties through guidance and through policy notes to try and work to resolve disputes before they even, you know, turn into disputes, if you like, to work more closely together, to think about their contracts and think about the risk of disputes right at the very beginning and early, but rather than wait till a dispute has happened. And, you know, drawing on what Justin has been saying, Charles, you know, and what you've also been talking about in terms of the way the industry's changed and how it's going to change in the future. Do you think that parties are either becoming more trigger happy now, or do you think they are more prepared to resolve issues amicably and work together to try and deal with problems?
Well, I think that there has been what we saw certainly at the early stages of the current pandemic was a lot of conversation, a lot of goodwill, a lot of very positive talk about support, about the fact that people are going to work together, that people understand that this is something that impacts everyone, and it was really noticeable. Actually, it was very noticeable in my mind. So although yes, you're right, and we did see a significant jump in applications, we still saw this conversation, this general conversation, saying, well, look, you know, we're talking with the supply chain and things are working. But I think that lasted to a degree, to a point, and then I think my feeling is that what happened is that those kind of general positions of kind of goodwill and intent got a bit stretched, and frankly people realized that, because ultimately it's a case of how the flow of money is going to go. If there is no flow of money coming down from the top, then it's not going to necessarily pass down to the bottom, and then you get to this point where you do still have disputes being as you say, people are becoming a little bit more trigger happy, and what I think it's fair to say we're seeing now is those kind of conversations have got to a point people realize that actually, yeah, but maybe there's not the cash coming down. So now there are a greater number of claims, and it will be interesting to take people's views on the average, how to put this, the quality of the packages that are being put together in respect of trying to make sure, people are looking to try and get avenues to get money through the supply chain. And what we're seeing at the moment is people are being a bit more creative maybe in how they present claims that they might not otherwise have presented, because they think, oh, coming back to Justin's point you mentioned about force majeure, well, as it depends contractually, of course, but very often force majeure won't give an entitlement to costs, and that's really where a lot of people are being hit in the pocket. So now, well, how can we come up with something that gives us some recovery of cost for what's happening, because we might not otherwise be able to get that.
Charles, thank you very much for that real world experience and what you say there. I'm going to move quickly on to Laura. Laura's sitting there patiently. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself and let's have a conversation.
Yeah, let's do that. So hi everyone, I'm a senior associate at Trowers and Hamlins. I'm a contentious construction solicitor advocate, and I do both, both a number of types of disputes, so international, all related to construction, international arbitration, litigation, adjudication, mediation, and expert determination, and of course, risk prevention and advisory work. So that's in a nutshell.
And your question, Laura, is very much about whether the pandemic has increased or reduced willingness of parties to actually approach conflicts in a less adversarial way. What's your experience?
Well, I think when the pandemic started and the lockdown started, there was a tendency to, or there was a more of a willingness to compromise. And because it was so unprecedented what happened with the pandemic, I think parties and companies were more willing to delay entering into disputes to see first how the pandemic is going to be addressed. However, I think now it's back to normal, and if anything, we've seen, and like you said before, there was an increase in adjudication domestically before going to litigation. Adjudication, as we all know, is commercially more viable for the parties, and particularly, I would say, more accessible for smaller construction companies. I mean, 80% of the construction industry consists of smaller construction companies. And then internationally, of course, international arbitration is hugely popular in construction. I would dare to say more so than litigation in my personal experience.
So rather than the current situation lead people to start thinking of working more collaboratively, working to try and deal with issues less adversarially, what you're suggesting is that as the COVID situation arose, people were effectively banking disputes. That's
a really interesting way of putting it. I think looking at it from another perspective, if you have a large company, then and also if you have an upturn or downturn in economy, you can have an potential increase in disputes, either because companies have the money to actually carry the burden of the fees entering into disputes, or simply on the other hand, because they are counting each and every penny and they are desperate to actually get everything that they feel belongs to them, and so they will enter a dispute more readily.
And parties, when they're thinking about using adversarial procedures like litigation and arbitration, are they thinking about the costs and the time that it takes to get through a dispute using those procedures?
They are, and this is also our role as legal advisors to always give them the information, what their options are. So, of course, both litigation and international arbitration especially can be quite expensive. They have their benefits. I think you or somebody else said earlier, litigation gives you certainty, and with international arbitration, it gives you that sort of complex, compact solution mechanism. Got parties from different countries. But we do always advise, look, you may want to settle first, or you can really settle at any stage of a dispute. So we always tell the parties, even if you enter into a formal dispute resolution process, nothing is stopping you to end it and try and discuss it with the other party, settle and end the formal dispute resolution process.
And as a firm, are you encouraging parties to deal with disputes much earlier, or are you coming at the point where they've become entrenched, they now need legal advice to take a dispute through arbitration or the litigation process?
You mean when are we approached by the client, as in at what stage of the dispute?
That's a better way of phrasing the question I've just asked. Yes,
Yeah, no, thank you. So I would say always seek legal advice early, and if it's it can be any lawyer. I just say in general, because it can avoid a lot of pitfalls. If you get that legal advice early, that actually can mitigate the likelihood of having to go through a full-blown dispute process.
And do you, as a firm, have any sort of real-life experiences of disputes being avoided in terms of not going to litigation, not going to arbitration, but parties actually working to try and resolve them between themselves, either through a mediative process or through some sort of conflict avoidance mechanism?
Absolutely, mediation is extremely popular, and it's something that you can use on its own, or like I said before, you can actually interrupt and suspend, legal proceedings and enter mediation because it's not very long. And the advantage, of course, of that is that even if the parties are highly emotionally embroiled in something and are not able to face each other directly, mediation gives that breathing space, separate rooms, mediator, another party who's neutral to actually resolve the disputes, and yes, parties to like to mediate, and it's very cost efficient as well.
And how amenable or otherwise are the parties that you're dealing with to suggestions to use mediation rather than go down the litigation route, for example?
They will always consider mediation, but of course the parties will be under different pressures. If we act for government bodies or large companies or smaller companies, they can have different agendas. They will have to have certain financial targets to meet, etc. But mediation or alternative dispute resolution will always be discussed and considered by all parties.
Do you see any differences in regions? Is there a regional cultural, how to phrase this? You're much better at phrasing my own questions than I am, I know. What I'm trying to say here is, is it easier in some parts of the world to get parties to use mediation or non-adversarial procedures than other parts of the world?
That's an interesting question. I would say it's a mix of both. I'm sorry not to give a clear-cut answer to that, but it is a mix of both. So I can say from experience that international arbitration in the construction industry is booming in the Middle East. So that's one thing. But there are complexities in terms of the various jurisdictions, etc. as well. But like I said before, we always offer mediation to the parties and remind them now is a stage where actually it would be a good time to attempt settlement. And quite often the parties will try that, at least by form of a letter or email, to get the other side engaged.
Laura, thank you for now. That's really useful. Thank you very much. I'm going to swiftly move on to Helen. Helen, if you could perhaps introduce yourself for 30 seconds and let's have a conversation.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name's Helen Colley. I'm a technical director with HK in London. I'm a structural engineer and I run the structures group within our forensic technical services group, which supplies expert advisory and opinion to parties either prior to or during a construction dispute as they need it. So obviously I provide structural engineering opinion, and I have a team of structural and civil engineers. We also have MEP, architecture, and other specialist technical disciplines.
Is anybody else having difficulty hearing Helen's audio? Was it just me?
Just you. Well, I could hear it perfectly, Martin.
Yeah.
I'll move my microphone. Is that better?
There we go.
I look more like an air traffic
the question
controller.
we're dealing with now here is one that's really close to my heart, actually. It's all about,
I've got now.
Yeah. It's all about technology.
Yeah.
Helen,
and I just, before I can, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
It looks like there was a little blip there, but we're doing okay. Let's see how we get on. We'll focus in now on technology, and I think the part of the theme of changes is very much around the what's happening going forward in the future, and we're really interested to hear if you've got any experience in technology having a role in reducing construction disputes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the question of whether it has a role in reducing construction disputes is a little bit leading, in the sense that yes, it does have a role, but it potentially also has a role in increasing them. So I want to talk about both sides of that, really. I mean, there is certainly a lot of capacity for technology to reduce construction disputes. I think in the situation we're in, particularly with the pandemic, difficult situations can breed innovation. Like every other industry that's been stuck at home, the construction industry's come up with ways to counteract that. and some of those have been technological. Some are good, some have improved process, but I think we need to be a bit careful about how enthusiastically we embrace them or see them as, you know, the solution to the industry's problems. That's particularly true for the construction industry because it's been a steep learning curve, I think. The construction industry is not particularly well renowned for early adoption or its speed to innovate. I'm going to repeat a quote that I really enjoy from the former CEO of Multiplex. He said, "From a digital and innovation point of view, construction is just one step ahead of farming," which is fairly damning indictment of his own industry, really. I'm not sure that that's entirely fair, but because the construction industry is so huge, it can be difficult to implement technological change. The COVID has been a catalyst for digitalization, but I almost wonder if it's come around a little bit too fast in terms of we've been forced into it. And, you know, when you're forced into reliance on something, particularly in a virtual environment, does that mean, you know, that's potentially problematic in terms of you're reliant on something you're not actually 100% up to speed in using. So that's where I see the problem is just inexperience, and as speaking as an engineer, that's one of the biggest problems in the industry generally anyway, is a skills shortage. And you know, do we have the necessary people to be using technology in the way that we are? But to talk more specifics, I mean, BIM is the obvious one, has an incredible capacity to reduce disputes because, in short, you know, a BIM model allows you to test ideas quickly and efficiently. Clash detection is a really obvious win. Until BIM came along, we couldn't, you know, you had to sit and do that manually, and now you can do it automatically. You can make better changes, you can make more efficient designs quicker and cheaper. Digital twin technology, I can't say that I'm an expert on it, but from the reading that I've done, the research that I've done, it promises to be extremely effective in identifying potential problems several years down the line, which I see a lot of in structures, civils and structures, of problems to do with maintenance, whether the maintenance strategy was correct, whether it was correct but didn't work because it was untested, things like that. We can test things out in advance with digital twin technology, and that promises to be incredibly powerful. So I think those are the really obvious ones. And then on the
Helen,
physical side, yeah, sorry.
No, you carry on and I'll come in a moment.
It was just that on the last point, I want to touch on physical technology. So, for example, drones and, well, AI is not really a physical technology, but I'm talking about it in the sense of using, it's not AI, AR, sorry, augmented reality on site, which is being trialled, I know, at the minute, or in fact used, I think possibly Mace or someone have used it very successfully recently on walking around a site. And obviously that's enabled things to go ahead during a pandemic. So that it kind of brings a continuity aspect that we didn't previously had. When a site was shut, it was shut. When something was unsafe, it was unsafe. Now we have these technologies to keep things going. But again, I'm going to be the voice of doom and gloom, is, you know, I do have concerns about whether virtual site knowledge is any replacement for solid site experience. People who've been working on sites for 20 years, they know exactly what to look for. A drone does not. And a drone operator is not the same as an experienced site operative. So again, I think the role of technology is down to how we use it and whether we use it well. And part of the problem we have is the skills gap at the moment in being able to do that, I think.
Thank you very much, Helen. I'm going to ask for you for a view in a moment, but I'll ask the others if they might join in as well with this one. Not so long ago, I attended a conference of rural chartered surveyors, and I was absolutely astounded by the way they had embraced technology. Not the thing you would have expected, I know, from rural practitioners. So I was very interested to hear you suggest that, you know, the construction industry is perhaps even behind the rural side in terms of its embracing of technology. But why do you think the industry has been and is slow in embracing technology?
Well, I think part of it, like I said, I think is the size and scale of things that we're doing generally. is almost a shot in the foot. So anything that is quite small and we would be a prime perfect thing to try out a technology on or get up to speed with it is too small to justify the cost of the additional technology. Anything bigger and the risk is too high to put something into practice that isn't used. So we learn as an industry, and again, it's about collaboration. I think there's been a lack of collaboration where if everyone joined together, decided we're going to implement BIM, and there have been efforts to do that, but if we all decide we're going to implement BIM, we're going to use it for everything, we should share best practice, we should share how we do things. That would maybe encourage adoption of technology onto bigger projects, whereas because that information isn't available, the tendency for project managers or for engineers, practicing engineers, is to do the same thing they've always done. And that's something in construction that I'm sure everyone here has seen is, well, this is how we've always done it. And that's, you know, it works, but it doesn't always lead to the best result, but it's at least predictable. Whereas the outcome with using new technology is unpredictable, and construction doesn't like unpredictability because you're spending a lot of money and you want a fixed result at the end.
I hear what you're saying. I had a glance through the Crux report, and I'm looking again at the slides that HKA produced today, and there is this message that comes across that technology does have a role to play going forward in reducing disputes, and it's very interesting in terms of some of the examples that are given by HKA in its report. And I think, I don't know, Charles, if you might want to come in on this, that there perhaps going forward as part of this changing culture, this whole change that's happening throughout the industry, that the speeding up of, if you like, progression might include greater use of technology as a means to kind of help address disputes much earlier, either through better information. You know, Helen's talked about BIM, talked about having better data, more information, sharing that information. That is at the, you know, when I give talks about dispute resolution, I often say that at the heart of many disputes is a lack of information. You know, parties position themselves based on what they know, what they think they know. But with more technology, more information, there could be the potential for a reduction in disputes going forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. You know, this idea that a greater level of information, as long as it's the right information, as long as it's accurate information, and as long as it's it can be identified, utilised, and analysed and applied by both sides equally, then you know, knowledge is power, isn't it, as they say. So the more information there is out there, hopefully the less difference between the parties there will be. You know, you've probably been involved, I'm sure Laura has, I'm sure you have a comment on this in respect of, you know, the first issue you need to get over with an dispute really is the kind of the understanding of the facts. And if the parties can't even get aligned on what the facts are, then, you know, often things spiral out of control even more. So, you know, this idea of the information movement, not just in looking at, you know, dealing with risk and dealing with past instances, but also looking at the facts of the case. And I think the information flow should assist that. I don't know, Laura, if you've got thoughts on that.
Well, all I can say is that in my view, obstacles are always an opportunity for evolution. And so communication is absolutely essential. And I think that innovation and technology can accelerate that and make it more accessible, make it more precise. So I'm not sure to what extent technology can help us reduce the number of disputes, but what I can say that during disputes, it can be immensely helpful.
Thank you, Laura. And certainly I'd encourage anybody who hasn't yet read it to have a look at the report and what it says about technology and how its introduction can have an impact on conflicts and disputes, and mainly around that kind of sharing of information and knowledge. To all my speakers, I'd like to say thank you very much. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask? Either from the audience or indeed any of our speakers want to add to what's been discussed as well.
Come I'd like to come in on the technology point and why
Please do.
Our sector hasn't taken it up. And I agree with what Helen said, but I would add to that also. I think the reason that not robots and things like that, I think one of the reasons that hasn't happened is because everything we build is different. Yeah, so we're not building one mini and then replicating it a million times, but the auto sector does. I think the problem we've got is around standards. So we do everything different. We ran a round table at RICS 5 years ago, and we got all of the software people in the room and had dinner at HQ. They don't talk to each other. They all operate in silos. Yeah, there's no like group that gets them together. And I thought RICS might be able to do that, but we didn't. I think we missed a trick there. So they don't have a standard way of approaching it. I think now we do have an opportunity because now we've got ICMS 3, so that's cost, life cycle, and carbon all being reported in the same way, and the software companies are going to take that up. So I think you've got a chance then of some disruption. It'd be interesting to see on the Autodesk side, Revit and the like, if what they're doing, if they are now talking to other people so that these models are transferable.
I think in summing up, we've only got a few minutes left. It seems to me that what the Crux report has highlighted is this, as it's described, eye-watering effect of disputes right across the construction engineering industry, and that this is real, this is happening now, and it's also historic. You know, this is something that's been around for a long time. What it also comes across is there's an appetite and actually actions that are happening that are helping to address and change the culture of the industry. You know, Charles, your explanation of what's happening as a result of COVID, you know, the short, long term, the massive amount of impact that's happening in terms of moving forward and making people think, there's a lot of good that can come out of that. And I think part of that can be people starting to think the future that we really do need to change the industry so that it is much more able to grapple conflicts and disputes before they even happen at an early stage, and certainly as they start to emerge rather than it's far too late. Justin's given a sort of a real world example of, you know, this is happening. The disputes are now on the increase, and they have been for a while, but also that the nature of those disputes has changed, you know, in terms of what parties are arguing about. And that's kind of very interesting. It's certainly come across in at least one of the conference I've attended. And Laura, you know, the appetite, particularly internationally, for the use of arbitration and parties getting good advice to, you know, to make the best of a process like arbitration. But this increase in use of a process like that can only be for the good if it just at least gives parties the opportunity to have certainty, but also a cost-effective way of resolving the disputes, whereby they get a decision made ultimately by somebody who understands the dispute, understands the nature of the beast that they're dealing with. Helen, this whole subject of technology, I think, is one that's going to be on our radar for a long time to come, and it's, I think, going to be the future, that there is a movement. I talked at a recent conference about how adjudication, for example, which is something that's been used widely to resolve disputes in the UK construction industry for nearly 30 years, has evolved over a long period of time. But within the last 12, 18, 20 months, it has taken a huge leap forward. And part of that is because of technology. I was listening to a highly experienced adjudicator talking about how he uses technology now to adjudicate, whereas 2 years ago he wasn't. And I think it's there, and it's the future going forward. I'd like to just thank all of you for the time that you've given today to join this. I think it's been an interesting and valuable discussion. I hope the audience have enjoyed it too. Danielle, do we have another slide just to kind of settle things off here? We will publish a recording and a written summary of this webinar. I hope you take advantage of that, and please take a few moments to share your thoughts on this webinar using the online poll which will appear on your screens after the event is finished. And please also join us for another webinar in the future. go to the website for further details. And you can also, on that website, of course, watch previous webinars. Danielle? Yeah, this is the World Built Environment Forum Global Summit will be set in Dubai as part of the Expo 2020 event in January 2022. I can hear you saying, what's the 2020 event happening in 2022? But of course, we all know the reason for that. That's why we've been having our chat today. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. It just remains for me just once more to say you can download this webinar and to say thank you very much. And you can also download the WebF from the App Store, Google Play. So I think all those formalities are out of the way. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today.